We gotta
You
do
gotta,
some
yeah,
stuff for
you gotta do something.
him.
You know what's
You
funny?
gotta give me a
So
back rub.
before
Give me a back rub.
Justin, before you posted about sending the gift and whatever on your WeChat moments, I'm in another group chat, like a Reddit group chat of like foreigners, and some guy was like sharing screen grabs of a Xiaoqu that they live in, being like, they're talking about which iPad to send to the 居委会like volunteer, either the iPad or the Microsoft Surface, then blah blah blah. And then is that your building?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
So that's your building, yeah. And he was sharing the screen grab, and then so my group chat was talking about it, be like, what the fuck, like people sending gifts and like iPads, like what the hell's going on here? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that guy might be on my building.
Yeah.
What's his name?
So that's, I don't know. I have to double check, but that's why when I saw you post it, I was like, oh shit! So it's Justin's building.
It's pretty hilarious.
and then when Vivi saw it, I wrote Stockholm syndrome on your thing because that's what she was saying. She was like, it's like Stockholm syndrome.
Well, everyone's experience is different, right? Our guy has been really chill the whole time. He's never prevented us from actually doing anything. But at the same time, these are not the people that write the rules. They're not making the rules. They're volunteers, so.
But even that, like above the volunteers, you also have the Suji, right? Like the guy who's running the 居委会, for your community.
Yeah.
And even he has nothing he can do.
Yeah. Well, there's certain things they can do that affect us. So like yeah, I mean there's despite kind of the conversation around these things, there's actually it's a lot of levels of management that actually exist. But we like to simplify it as in just the government, right? But there's so many levels that it trickles down to that affect kind of our experience with it. And every xiaoqu, I guess, is going to be different depending on how your place is managed, right? So everyone's experience is going to be different, like we said before. Yeah, our guy has been really good. Like he has been a big help. He's been really cool about everything. And when you talk to them, they're in it too. It's like when they initially signed up to volunteer, they thought it was just going to be for a few days. Now they're trapped here too, and they have it in many ways worse than us because we get to like just chill in our homes in our own beds. He's sleeping on a cot like downstairs throughout the entire 2 months. I don't even know where he goes to the bathroom. I don't know how he takes a shower. So I mean, in many ways they have it worse than us, and he's been really helpful to my community. So that's why like kind of my neighbors just like love him so much. And then especially when you hear or see all these like really terrible scenarios that a lot of other people are going through, in many ways that should make you appreciate the good ones even more. So I mean that's been our case with him. And yeah, that's what I posted.
I'm curious, Eric, what about you? Like where you're living, because you're not in a xiaoqu, like how has the communication been going on with your dabai or your 居委会?
It seems pretty smooth. We've been really lucky. Like Justin's saying, it depends on the neighborhood you're in. Essentially, Shanghai's been broken down into 50,000 villages. And imagine you were living hundreds, thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of the rules are being sort of made up. So like imagine like in ancient China, and I'm just speculating, of course, and you've got some kind of king or emperor, and then you just got like thousands of villages. And how long does it take information to get from the emperor and the ruling people down to the individual villages, and who makes the rules? And things weren't obviously as centralized. And even with language, and then Qing Shi Huang kind of brought things together. So I don't know a whole lot about the history, but I think there was a point where like all the villages were actually fighting each other. So in our scenario, the villages aren't really fighting each other. There's pretty clear, I don't know if it's clear, but like there's information coming from the government, and there's some type of strategy. As ambiguous as some people might claim it to be, it's for the last 2 months, there's information and there's some variations between how it gets carried out, but we don't really know what those layers look like that Justin you're talking about. So as the central government then talks to maybe the individual districts and then down to the villages, and then I imagine it's just all human beings. So when you look at this from a big sociological experiment, it's a pretty interesting one. Nicholas Christakis in Blueprint, when he studied those shipwrecks, it's like we had like 50,000 shipwrecks basically happening in China, in Shanghai simultaneously. And then you can kind of see like the social networks that emerge from it. I think everyone's nice here. We have a small, like our neighborhood, I guess. I don't really know too much, but I start recognizing the people when I go do my testing. And they just seem pretty nice. I think like my in-laws probably know some of these people. And in the beginning of it, as an example, in the beginning of the testing, I'd always go like at 11 or 12 o'clock, like when I had a small break during lunch after most of my meetings. And it would be very difficult for me to get there. And the time window usually is like 8 to 12. So you can imagine in some buildings, like it's a blowhorn and they're going mental and they're like yelling and screaming and trying to get people, because you've got maybe thousands of people in that neighborhood. And our neighborhood is much smaller. There's probably just a few hundred people or so. And so like I would always show up at like 12. I'd be like the last one. And then my process would look a little bit differently. I'd show them my QR code and it'd be like some English name. In the beginning, it was like a hassle. People didn't know how to manage it. And now it's like super smooth. And when I walk up now, they're like, oh, like, they give the whatever our number of our place. And then they're like, oh, Eric. Okay. Like they know my name and everything because I'm the only dude that has the English in it. Or I'll go up there and it'll be like another dot by and be like, oh, like, na wei. And I'll be like, oh, like blah, 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 like 英文的名字. And like, oh, right. And then the doctor is the same. It's like the same doctor. I recognize that guy. And he's like super nice. He's like, oh, 今天早来了嘛? Like, oh, yeah, 今天没有开会. So you start recognizing everyone. So every village is going to be probably a little bit different. What I have noticed though is that like there's a lot less yelling in the last few weeks. I think in the beginning, because they would just be like, come out for your test. And there's a lot less yelling. And people just like, I think the communication has started becoming more refined. And so probably there's some communication in WeChat. I don't know. My in-laws just tell me, oh, like 明天要做核酸. I'm like, oh, again? And the first few weeks, we get really annoyed because we thought lockdown was going to end any time. And then now we're just kind of like, oh, 要做核酸了, okay. 要静默吗? Oh, 没有, 不用静默. Like it's a fact of life at this point. And then you just start seeing things kind of loosen up a little bit. So,
it's funny when Justin, when you were saying that it's like living in these thousands of small villages.
Eric said that.
Oh, sorry, Eric. When you said that, I think you were so accurate in that feeling because it's almost like the like in the group chats, the 居委会person is like the village elder, being like, everybody, you must listen to me. We must do this, you must do that. And everyone's like, okay, trudging along. And then everybody's asking, oh, well, what about that village? That village is doing this. How come we're not doing that? It's this constant comparison with all the other like villages on our side, and it's just it's like a taste of what it might have been like, back in the day.
Yeah, and like I think what's extraordinary is if you were to look at the variation in experience within, let's say, at the village level. So the average experience of a person in one of those areas, if we consider that like a unit, a village, and you say 50,000 or however many in Shanghai, and what was the average experience? And then you start comparing, for instance, oh, did you need a pass to leave your place? Can you only leave your place like, twice in 5 days, et cetera, et cetera. And you start looking, were you able to get deliveries and food? What type of food? Did government give you stuff? And you look at all the different categories of experience that would be linked to how that village was run and the resources that village had and the power that those villages, the elders in the village had, et cetera, right? It's going to be different. It's going to vary from place to place. And you overall looked at all of the different villages and you compared that. The experience probably is somewhat similar. And that's a testament to just like the level of consistency that can arise in a place that is so centrally controlled, like China or Shanghai. If you were to do the same experiment in other countries, you would get
It
maybe
wouldn't
different
work.
results.
I don't
Well, it
think it
wouldn't
would
work,
work.
and you get different results and stuff. So I do think it would be interesting to kind of, if we could get like data around what this actually looks like for everyone, like what that average experience looked like what percentage of people had an emergency medical issue and weren't able to get to the hospital, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's as things trickle down the ranks, it never gets better, it only gets worse, right? So like what I think it was, especially in the beginning, I mean, obviously the situation has evolved and changed, I think, overall for the better now and stabilized, but especially kind of in the first half of the lockdown, I think, there was a lot of rumors about what was happening at the uppermost levels of government, between Beijing coming in and Shanghai kind of being sidelined. And so it just felt like it was a shit show at the top. And so I think that's kind of a lot of what happened. I'm guessing, but it feels like that's a lot of what happened because I feel like as that shit show trickled and filtered down through the ranks, a lot of people at the local and community level were put in a position where now they have to manage a bunch of people. They have a certain level of authority, and they have to manage all these people in a time of emergency. And I would argue that probably a lot of these people were never put in this type of situation before and are not qualified to do so, to lead, are not qualified to even maybe hold that much power in a time of crisis. And it was a unique time for them as well. So I just feel like, that's the stuff that's directly going to affect us, right? So on the uppermost levels, you can argue and debate about, the zero COVID policy. And obviously it all starts from there, right? But then as it trickles down, everyone seems to be having a kind of different experience with this thing throughout this entire time. And I felt like the kind of chaos that we saw was really kind of manifesting at the local levels um, and the community levels. And that's why there was so much, and there still is so much inconsistency with the rules. Even with this pass to go out and leave your building, everyone has different rules. And so if it was from a top down thing, everyone would have the same experience. It'd be like one hammer coming down. That's it. The rules are the rules. But I think a lot of it was left up to interpretation at the local level. And you also have people who might feel pressure kind of not to be like the first one to kind of let, more COVID cases start popping up again. So they feel this certain level of accountability. And so everyone's kind of protecting their own ass and playing it ultra conservative and playing chicken, like who's the first one that's going to kind of let loose and relax a little bit. And everyone's looking around each other, but no one wants to step up first. And so you have this really long, prolonged period of just like this kind of gray area that we're in now where things seem to be looking up, but it's not official. And I don't know. I just feel like there's probably a lot of people who just don't want to be responsible for the risks of opening up. And that goes from all the way at the very local community level, all the way up to the top.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Yeah. That's exactly what's happening. That's why it's funny whenever my mom, who's in Taiwan right now, she would send me these articles or like these video clips or whatever, and being like, "Hey, look, Shanghai is opening up, at this date or whatever. You should be excited." I'm like, "No, I don't listen to these news because it does nothing to me. It does nothing for me." I've already had it happen a couple of times where something's supposed to happen, but then the Jiuhui would be like, "Oh, sorry, we're not able to do that yet." So exactly, who's gonna take the responsibility? Even though the government mandate on a higher level has already been stated. The people below, they still feel like, well, they don't want to take that chance. It's really weird, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why I was gonna push back on like your earlier comment about these people at the local level don't have much power. They do. Like over they have a significant amount of power over our immediate kind of experience because they can make the small decisions that will kind of really alter our experiences. And I think that's where a lot of the inconsistencies lie. So,
Yeah.
when I post stuff about like, oh, look how my neighbors are like really like, they really like our dabai and they're giving him gifts and stuff like that. Like I post that knowing very well that that's not everyone's experience. But that's not my agenda. My agenda is just to post what I see, and that's my direct experience. That's what I'm posting my life.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else to say in terms of, the kind of general sentiment people have in the city because it's hard to find that kind of average that Eric was talking about because it's so scattered. There's so many varying experiences, so I don't really know what is the kind of average sum of experiences.
Yeah, you can only speculate so much, right?
Yeah.
Hey, what do you guys think about what happened with Amphilu?
What happened with Amphilu?
I mean, with the
They had
basically,
kind of like a Mardi Gras. Basically, they got let out. They
yeah.
had a Mardi Gras, and then they shut it down. Yeah. Uh,
Did you not
it
see it?
wasn't.
It
I
was
mean, it was
funny.
like just
No.
kind of silly. It's kind of that like what what it reminded me of. It reminded me of like 10 years ago when we would party and then we'd go out and we'd meet people. And I remember like we'd just get so wild, and then I distinctly remember people like being like, "Oh, like I used to be like you." Like now I'm mature and I don't do that stupid shit anymore. And then we get really mad and then threaten to beat them
Yeah.
up. Like that would
So
happen like every time we went out. Like I feel like now I'm that elder statesman,
yeah,
and I'm kind of like, "Oh, you guys are idiots. I did that before." And I
yeah.
remember like being like so insulted by these people because they would be like, "Oh yeah, I was like you before." Like, yeah, I'm past that. Now I'm a banker and
It
I
was like
just
so
do my thing now.
condescending, right?
It was so condescending. I'm like, "You want to fight?" like,
Well,
like
Eric, let's explain to Justin if he doesn't really know, or plus if the listeners are listening, they
Yeah,
don't know.
what
So
happened?
basically, what happened was, we recently some of the communities got opened up, right? And so Amphilu, French Concession area, especially Amphilu, it's very well known to be a place that a lot of foreigners congregate for drinking, having nice restaurants, stuff like that.
well, let me
And
hold on.
so
Let me add to that. It's a very nice central road with lots of trees, and it's
mhm.
known to be al fresco. People dine outside, and there's a huge amount of everyone. It's not just foreigners. Like you'll find tons and probably more locals now than before, right?
Yes.
But there were certain restaurants where in the past it was like more foreigner centric, but then once Chinese people realized how great it was, like it's a popular street. I don't think there's that distinction anymore between locals and foreigners really too much,
But
because
yeah,
anything
but
that's good, the locals will just jam pack. You don't
I no,
see a
I
whole lot
that
of
I
that stuff.
agree. That I totally agree with what you just said. But I mean, it is. I mean, it is a common place where a lot of foreigners like to go. I'm not saying all
And
foreigners,
locals, yeah, and locals.
Yes,
All right,
Yeah,
well,
yes, yes. I
that's
I agree
agree.
with
not
what you're
the
saying.
point. Just go on with the story.
I know,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know, I know. So anyway, because I'm playing with these stereotypes because it matters, right? And so one of the nights, like 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago, basically became like Tianzi, like Hong Kong, what the fuck is it called? Oh my
Languifang.
god,
Okay,
Lan
yeah.
Kui Fong like style. Basically, everybody on the street like drinking, laughing all through the night, right? And so they were doing like these like I don't know what they're called, but people laying down and doing
Keg
a crowd
stands.
dive.
Keg stands.
No, like a crowd dive. You know what I mean? It just basically like
Is that
shuttling
called keg
people
stand,
through.
Justin?
No, not a kickstand, not a kickstand.
Oh, they were
So
doing
basically,
crowd surfing.
crowd surfing, yeah,
Yeah,
like a form of crowd
It
surfing.
but
was
instead of standing up, Justin,
They
the
were sitting
people
down.
that were they were sitting down and they were just kind of like crowd surfing.
But it was
Yeah.
that packed where you could crowd surf on the street?
Yeah.
No.
Only
It was
in
a
the
narrow
middle.
strip.
So there was 7
Yeah.
Oh.
people or 8 people lined up. Like it was pretty packed. It's like a found 158 type of situation, or an old Maominglu. And there was 7 or 8 people, and they would be sitting down, and then people would be like, "Whoa!" and then dive in and stuff like that.
Okay,
It
so it
wasn't
was,
anyway,
it was a giant
so it
outdoor
was-
party.
Yeah, and then people are drinking and stuff like that, and just going nuts. And then what happened? I guess the big issue is the next day. There's also a lot of resident compounds, right around there, and so there's a lot of group chat photos being shared of local compounds being like really racist towards foreigners, and being like, fucking foreigners, what the fuck's wrong with you? Because they're like, we're not wearing masks and stuff like that. And be like, they're fucking pissing and shitting everywhere, and then they're sharing photos of shit and like areas of pee all over, because there's no bathrooms. You know what I mean? So you can imagine how rowdy it got. And plus, they're partying until the middle of the night. The cops are doing nothing, and so it became like this big thing where it was almost like this racism going on, and then you had a couple of people trickle in, be like, look, there's a lot of like Chinese locals with them as well. And then you have like the racists coming back and be like, well, they think they're white and they think they're international and stuff like that. So it became like this little ordeal, locally, just because of that one incident. And then the next day, as Eric kind of said, was the police kind of like locked it down the next day, and so it got taped off, and that was it. So just one night.
That's what it is. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you put that spin on it, Howie. But I didn't really read some of the comments, and I think like that was a very localized thing. There's probably that's how social media sort of creates this narrative, and then people kind of jump on the back. But I don't know how much, like, if it was racism, but in that moment, the comments were racist. I'm not sure how much racism were there.
Well, that's what it is. Comments. It's bandwagoning. You just said it actually right there. It's bandwagoning. Once someone says it, everyone jumps on. Not everybody, but people jump on. And then you have different sects. You have that, WeChat groups of, whatever, speaking that language. And then you have other groups of people, maybe some other foreigner groups. Like, for example, I'm in this other foreigner group that were also criticizing them. Sort of like what you said. It's like, we're like the elder statesmen being like, those fucking idiots. You just got out of a lockdown. What are you trying to do? Keep us in lockdown even longer?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, my personal opinion, just from listening to it, we just got out, for God's sakes. Like, you like take it easy, Like no one wants to go back into this lockdown or extend this lockdown, and here you are increasing our chances, even if it doesn't spread, but just increasing like the optics around it, where people in authority might look at that and be like, they're not ready to be let out yet.
Well, and Justin, what this shows is like we're no longer the haha monsters. We're the haha uncles. No, it's look. I mean, I try to just not get emotionally involved. Like, maybe I'm just detached, or maybe I'm less emotional these days. I'm not. Maybe I got off my Prozac. I'm just kidding. But look, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between like what happened there and what's happened all around the world. And you see, so basically what happens is that there is a party or some type of event, everyone gets together, it gets posted on social media, and then there's a group of people like, that's so irresponsible, and why would you do that? And like, I mean, there's just tons and tons of stories like that all around the world at different parts of the epidemic. In the UK, it was Boris Johnson. Like, I think they even had an inquiry panel to kind of look at like the social events that they were hosting. So like these events pop up all over the world. I personally am at the point in my life where I'm not interested in that. That's with a reference. I wasn't trying to judge them. If I made it sound that way, it wasn't. It was more just like, I'm not interested in that, right? I was just saying like, I'd rather travel, or I want to meet some of my friends. I don't have any interest in like going on the streets and partying. But I could understand why you'd go on the streets. Like, maybe if the three of us happened to be passing by that street, we were meeting a friend, we got a couple of drinks under our belt, we had a few shots. I mean, it would go sideways quickly.
We would totally join that party.
We totally be like, we would start that shit. The only difference is that we just didn't happen to be there.
Exactly.
Now,
We're so
those
self-righteous.
yeah, we're so self-righteous. Like that's what I'm saying. It's like, and then those people, if they were doing a show and they were living in Qingpu or whatever, they would look at us and be like those idiots. And that's kind of the reference. I was talking to my father-in-law and like in-laws this morning, and they were just like, yeah, like it's so like you get some. My mother-in-law was like, yeah, you get a bunch of people together. People have been locked down, they've been cooped up, and then you get some drinks in them. Shit's gonna go sideways. They just laughed. They were like totally not judgmental at
You know
all.
what
They
it reminds
totally
me of?
laughed.
It's exactly like back in the States when the States was kind of in lockdown and they were
Yeah.
going through it, and then we saw like spring break. So all the
Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the beaches in Florida were just like packed with people on spring break, and it was
Yeah.
like right in the
Yeah.
middle
Yeah.
of lockdown, right?
And we're like,
Yeah.
what the fuck?
Well, and they had COVID parties and all that stuff. So like, and the thing is like, so that social dynamic will happen anywhere. I think if anything, the risk level is much lower here, just because like in Shanghai and in China, COVID's not controlled by individual discretion. COVID is managed centrally by the government, which is a very different thing than any other place in the world. And the rest of the world is managed as a combination of government intervention, vaccines, policies, lockdowns, but also a lot of like individual behaviors and guiding and nudging those behaviors, because that's how those societies work, because they're democratic societies. And here it's a much more centralized approach to it, which mirrors the way the government would manage everything else. And in a way, we benefited from that. But I'll quickly go back to what you were saying earlier, Justin, around I think you made some really great points about um, how when things sort of trickle down to the lower levels of the government, and then they're subject to their interpretation, and then it's really just it becomes a human decision. So there's a certain amount of guidance that's given, but it's impossible. How do you manage 50,000 villages? It's extremely difficult. Like think about corporations and managing that kind of stuff, right? It's like it's a very operational role, but then it involves people. And so you get down to like human decisions, and then you see this wide range of responses that you mentioned. And in some villages, neighborhoods, there's a very strong bond between the people. Like it's like everyone has a great connection and they communicate really well. And then in some, there's finger pointing and all kinds of stuff. I think even in our neighborhood, at some point, there was some finger pointing, but it was very subtle. It was kind of like everyone was in the same WeChat group. Then someone would send a passive aggressive message about the Juehui, right? Like it would just make them look bad. So they would like fuck with them. But it wasn't like to the point where people are like fighting. So you see this whole wide range of the dynamic in the village. And I'm sure that relationship went up and down as well, because over time you probably got tired of fighting them and then you built relationships. So it's like 50,000 different individual societies. So the point, like I guess my counterpoint, or maybe I want to be less sort of absolute about it, is that if this same experience happened anywhere else in the world, if it happened in any other city in China, would that local place have been able to do a better job? I think most of the other cities around the world would have fucked it up worse. And so while it wasn't perfect and we all went through different experiences, in my opinion, might have been different if I had been in a neighborhood that's different than my current one and people were getting dragged away. But from my vantage point, I wonder if it could have been any better based on the complexity of the operation.
Well, I want to touch back on the racism bit for a second, because I don't know, I don't know anything about it. I didn't watch it, which speaks to another point is that that I want to get into later about social media. But I think you can also imagine, like, let's say anywhere else. Let's say it was in the UK. Let's say it was in the States, wherever, right? Like, and if it was like a predominantly Chinese or Asian crowd on the streets when everyone else was being locked down, just fucking screaming and yelling and partying it up and shitting and pissing on the streets, throughout the wee hours of the night, like, I'm also pretty sure that there would probably be some perceived
Backlash.
racist comments and backlash against that community, because, like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's how humans behave. So
I think they get beat up. Honestly, I think that like we probably alluded to this in the past. I think that my opinion would be that from living here and living in the US and living in a few different countries, that Chinese people treat foreigners probably generally better than other countries treat their foreigners when that country is quite, like if it was like a homogenous group like that. And so like you're right, like if it was in the US and then there was hundreds of mainland Chinese people on the streets like rioting, like they get beat up. Only in China can a group of like foreigners just do kind of whatever they want. Even with the police, they're not even afraid of the police.
I don't know what the reality is with that. I mean, I think my point I was trying to make is that, there's racism everywhere, you know? Certainly, I think there's racism in China, but obviously there's racism everywhere else too. And so, I mean, I just think we're tribal. We are tribal human beings. The human species is tribal. And as much as we try, or some of us try not to be, it is in our DNA. And the most primal tribal attraction is through race. That is the most primal thing that we're tribal about. It's just deeply, deeply rooted in us for whatever reason. And that is kind of like the most basic thing we default to. That's why you have people who are perfectly not racist whatsoever, but somehow you just feel more comfortable with the people of your own race. And as much as people try to deny that, you see that play out in larger populations, You take a city like Los Angeles. People tend to group in their own communities. That's just a big pattern of human behavior. And, it's just a part of life.
No, I agree.
Really know what
I agree
larger
with you.
point is.
I agree with you in terms of like you do want to have that tribalistic behavior naturally, right?
I'm not saying you
but
want it. I'm just saying it's a reality.
Yeah, but I disagree where it's just, race is your main factor.
No, I said it's the most primal, basic factor of tribalism.
I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know.
what's more basic?
Maybe
example.
I don't know.
What's a more basic example of tribalism than race? I
Well,
mean,
I
that
don't know,
is like
because
your blood tribe. That is literally like the tribe you are from.
Family.
yeah, but I mean,
But that's
but
race.
the reason why, the only reason
That's
why
not-
I'm saying
that's
that,
not the same as race. Family, like family in the sense of like familial bonds.
yeah, I think
Not
it's
exactly the
just
same as race,
just
'cause you could
I think
have,
it's
like, a
any
mixed
type
race
of
family.
familiarity, any type of familiarity, any type of common bond, right? It's just because the only reason why I'm saying that is just I'm just thinking back to how I was before, where I grew up in a non-Asian Chinese environment, and I felt perfectly fine and comfortable around non-Asians. I never thought about, I feel more comfortable around Asians. If anything, I felt uncomfortable around Asians back then because we were so different, like mentally, so different from like other whether it's my like extended family or other Asians in my community that I met. So I don't agree that.
Well, I think you're taking individually. Obviously, you're going to have people outliers, but I think the data will show if you looked at large swaths of population of people, you will see that the same races tend to group together in large swaths of population. Obviously, you have people who will be exempt from that, right? For example, a lot of people who grew up where we did. I mean, and even if you take like kind of primal human behavior and you look at, prison populations, and in a prison, the main rule is you stick to your own race. That is like the underlying rule, at least in American prisons, right? Because that's kind of what I researched most. Is that's the main rule throughout all the prisons in America, no matter where you get transferred to. The main underlying rule is you stick to your own race.
I didn't know you were a prison expert too.
I've watched a lot of documentaries and interviews about ex-prison and talking about prison life. It's a fascinating topic to me. It's a fascinating topic to me because it's like a small. it's like a small ecosystem, and it's like the ecosystem of the most primal human behavior played out in a prison population. And if you look at that, everyone sticks to their own race, and that's not an end all be all. But I'm just saying that is just further evidence that like in on a large scale like race becomes kind of like our underlying unspoken bond, for better or for worse.
What I would say, like my opinion on this again, I think you make a strong point and kind of moving the conversation that direction. I would say that race is it's a good indicator, but it's actually the culture. So it's like very close to what you're saying. I think it's more like the cultural thing. So like why do you bond with other people? It's because you have similar habits and traditions. And so obviously like if you're from like a same race, it's more likely that you'll have the same habits just because it's more like geography, culture. Like I would guess that would be the factors. Like what you eat, like all that stuff. But then race would be one of the easiest things to kind of stereotype that, right? Because if you
It's
saw
like a
two
shorthand.
Asian people,
It's like a shorthand for all those things that you mentioned.
Right, but it's not absolute, and the real root cause or whatever is like the underlying cultural elements. But if you see two Asian dudes or Asian people are like, "Oh, you like fried rice, don't you?" It's just, it probably is true, right? But that's kind of like a slippery slope to like racism and stuff like that. And
yes, I do.
Sort of to your like,
but
who
doesn't like fried rice? It's like black people with fried chicken. It's like who doesn't like fried chicken? It's delicious. Everyone should like fried chicken.
Right.
Like, you know,
well, and then you start seeing the similarities, right? Because like fried foods, like how many cultures like fried foods, like noodles, and that's a whole nother debate. I do think that the people that we aspire to be are the ones that will go out of our comfort zone to establish new social circles and to be open and be able to embrace like more different cultures and then have a richer experience and get out of that and like habitually, it's easier for us. I mean, look, there's 3 Asian American dudes on this show. We're guys, right? We're Asian American. We grew up in the U.S. It's easy. Like we're not starting a podcast with like a Croatian girl and an African guy or something like that. But I think we want to venture out a little bit more, I suppose. And it's ironic that we don't a lot of the time, and we move back to China where everyone looks like us.
But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that I'm not saying like where your morals lie. Obviously, we all want to be diverse, like the 3 of us, like that goes without saying. But it's the very point that you made. It's like we want to, but it's that we would have to put in a little more effort to be intentional about it, right? And why is that? Why is it that it doesn't come as natural to us as us 3 being together, where it would be if we had a Croatian girl and an African guy? Like, if we would want to do that, of course, but we would have to be intentional to do it.
Yes, you have to put in effort.
Yes. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's in us somewhere, right? This programming, for better or for worse, it's in us somewhere. And to your point, Eric, it's like we would have to be intentional to break out of that programming.
Yeah, I mean, but like we'd be shitting on ourselves if we weren't intentional. So I like, and in a way, I don't think it's that like that sort of groundbreaking. I think that we birds of a feather, we flock together because of evolutionary biological survival reasons, et cetera. I don't think it's extraordinary. I think it's it's
ubiquitous.
Sort of
that's my point. It's
we
ubiquitous.
all
It's
innately
everywhere.
but we all innately also understand that as well. And so like, for instance, reading books doesn't come naturally to people. Like, going and studying for a PhD doesn't, like, I don't think it's that groundbreaking or extraordinary. Doing a podcast is not that innate to people. It was very difficult for us at first. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that like, why can't it be normal? It can be normal. We're human beings where we can imagine things that we've never done before. And it's just extraordinary what human beings can do. It's really extraordinary that we can build things that are bigger than us. We can build things that can destroy all of us. We can build things that can transport us to space. And so the human imagination is like somehow we are wired with the capability to rewrite our own software programming. And I think that's the groundbreaking, extraordinary piece. And I think that like our natural, out of the box tendency to like flock together, I don't think that's extraordinary at all. I just think that's like basic, like animals do that, right? Like, so what I find
Well, you're so
extraordinary is the fact that
condescending, man. I never said it was extraordinary. I'm just saying it's like
no,
it's
no, no, I'm
normal.
not being condescending to you. I'm just saying
You're
it's
like
not
you keep repeating
what's
like
really
I don't
extraordinary.
think it's extraordinary. Exactly what you said, Justin, is not extraordinary at all. Like it's completely
You
simple.
simpleton.
Yeah, you simpleton.
We are so good at just doing that because it's like, and I think that's what makes us the show kind of funny is that we love being right, all three of us, even Howie secretly with that weak mind of his. And we just want to, we want like the other person to have like a good argument so that that person's credible, but then make one slight mistake and then boom, pounce on that
Yeah,
shit.
bounce.
Pounce.
We're
But-
pretty cutthroat in that way, huh? Like we
Yeah,
just
but we
want to
build
drive
on
it
each other.
home.
We build like honestly, like you both have. It's like I wouldn't have the ideas that I have on the show without building on top of what you're saying, and I just love to kind of tear it down as I'm building more.
Hey, should we
Uh,
talk a little bit about like what's been going on in the States recently? I feel like it's an interesting topic to talk about
Oh
briefly.
boy, yeah,
That's a can of worms.
yeah.
I mean,
That's a
let's
whole
talk
thing.
about it briefly. You know, it's like in the last 2 weeks, there's been like three mass shootings that's happened. That's been pretty.
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously that's the big elephant in the room, but there's so many things happening over there. I mean,
let's one by one.
my antennas went up first regarding the potential outlawing of abortion, right? And that
Yeah.
was a whole thing. Like that's when my antennas first started going up. I'm like, what is this? I mean, because that just seemed like so crazy
Yeah.
to me that that would be a a legitimate topic of discussion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so I'm like, what's happening there? And I mean, as much noise as like the West likes to make of like human rights issues here, I mean, that's a
Mm.
huge human rights issue in America.
It's like taking a step back into like the last century, or
Yeah.
not even the last century, like 2 centuries ago.
Like, why aren't we just burning women at the stake for witchcraft? I mean, like, it just feels like so backwards to me.
Oh, that's a good idea, Justin.
We should burn you at the stake for fucking bitchery. Oh snap!
Damn! Oh, that was a good one, Justin. You're
For
on
being
fire.
a bitch. No, but so that's when my first. I mean, and then you have the potential recession, and you have all the inflation, you have the gas prices, about kind of the economy, economic factors going on, which is another huge thing impacting lives over there. Yeah, and then the latest thing, and it's like it's even weird for me to say it's the latest thing because it's like such a pattern of repeated tragedies, right? And this is just the next one, and there will be a one after that, unfortunately, with the mass shootings. And the one in Uvalde is just that when I first saw that headline, that was it like I almost feel like we shouldn't even talk about it because like we can't even do it justice, like that tragedy, And yeah, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's just a dark, heartbreaking, like Debbie Downer. It's like I don't know if there's any value like maybe on this time to talk about. It's crazy.
But I mean, like everyone knows like the event that happened, but I think the larger discussion now is how do we prevent such a thing, right? And I feel bad. I feel bad for a lot of people living in America who truly want to have an honest conversation about this. But you have so many powers that be that kind of want to redirect the conversation. And use it just to invoke more political bickering. And you see that on both sides.
like I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts around it, and it's just like crazy, like all the different points of view. Um, but what I want to pivot to back to was like his initial question, like what's going on in the US, okay? And like we're not physically there, and we're getting everything through this like media filter. And I wonder like how accurate of a picture that we're getting, because we've talked about
Hmm.
like the social media like attacking your attention. And so like when we form that picture of what's happened in the US, what you thought of was similar to what would be in my head. I like how you brought up Roe v. Wade, like that decision that the Supreme Court in the U.S. made a while back, and I hadn't remembered that, but it makes a lot of sense because that also shows some of the polarization, like the different camps in the U.S. Right. Um, so going to the book 4,000 Weeks, there's a really interesting, there's one of the chapters it talks about, it's called the watermelon problem, but it talks about basically like social media and the social dilemma and some of the topics that we touched on before. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of revisit that a little bit and then kind of read a couple of quotes from it, because I wonder how much that's also shaping like our view of things. Maybe what's really happening objectively is something a little bit different, and certain pieces are being overemphasized. And because of that, we're also seeing polarization in the US because everyone's actually seeing it from this heightened angle, which gets everyone hyped up, right? And then they're all fighting. And to your point, there's got to be a more creative way to look at it, right? But if you don't mind, I'll start with like this short, this kind of funny story, right? And then I can pivot into the actual kind of social dilemma, kind of a couple of really great quotes that capture sort of our ideas. So basically, like he's telling this story, like in April 2016, like the elections were about to happen, and like that's all intensifying. But then there was this like ridiculous thing on BuzzFeed. So two reporters from BuzzFeed were wrapping rubber bands. So it's just like a ridiculous thing, like on YouTube or something, and they were wrapping rubber bands around a watermelon. Okay, so you just, it's kind of like Jenga. You put a rubber band around it, then you put another rubber band around it, and eventually it's going to explode. So people were kind of like not watching this, and then gradually over the course of 43 minutes, the pressure kept building up, building up, building up, and then they got to 686 rubber bands in minute 44. Like the 686 rubber band was applied, and then it like blew up, right? And then like everyone kind of celebrated. And the reason he brings up this analogy, I'll kind of read. He's like, I'm not raising this to imply that there's anything special about spending 44 minutes of your day staring at a watermelon, right? But like the problem is, this issue of distraction is like what's happening, because these 3 million people, he says it's a safe bet that none of these 3 million people woke up that morning with the intention of using a portion of their lives to watch a watermelon burst, right? And but once they got into it, like 30 minutes into it, they literally couldn't leave their screens anymore because they're like anticipating it. And so like he's making this point that it's like there's this quote, I've been watching you guys put rubber bands around a watermelon for 40 minutes. Like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? So he says the watermelon tail is actually a reminder, and it's synonymous with digital distraction. And what's happening is that like it's capturing our attention without our permission, and we're really just getting sort of like sucked into it, right? And so then he gets into this whole thing about social media, and then he says, but why is this significant? Because the book is about how short your life is and how you have to make the most of it. And he has a lot of different perspectives on that. But he says, attention, on the other hand, is your life. Your experience of being alive consists nothing other than the sum of everything to which you pay attention to. So at the end of the day, at the end of your life, looking back, whatever compelled your attention from moment to moment is simply what your life will have been. So when you pay attention to something that you don't value, it's not an exaggeration to say you're paying with your life. And it's crazy, right? With that watermelon thing, it's like, so like you don't even realize it. Like every day we're held captive by our screens, and all these companies are basically like hacking our brains, like we've said before, to get your attention. And that watermelon example was just such a kind of a iconic um, example of that, right? Where it's like, what the fuck is so interesting about watermelon? And then when he says you're paying with your life, I think that's what really got me. it's like, holy shit, my life is just a finite amount of time, and it is the attention that I apply. And if all my attention is just applying to trivia on a phone, that's what my life is. That's who I am. And when I die, it's the some moments of me looking at that bullshit. Now, here's brilliant, brilliant passage from the book. So he says, all of which helps clarify, so the situation, what's so alarming about what he calls the contemporary online, quote unquote, attention economy. Okay, attention economy, of which we've heard so much about. Essentially, it's a giant machine for persuading you to make the wrong decisions about what to do with your attention, and therefore with your finite life, by getting you to care about things you didn't want to care about. So we're, and we're sort of like, at least somewhat aware that our smartphones are tracking every move, recording how we swipe and click, what we linger on, et cetera, et cetera. The data is being collected. And it's to show us the content that's going to likely keep us hooked, which usually means it's whatever makes us angriest or most horrified, right? We've talked about this. I think he captures it beautifully. So therefore, all the feuds and the fake news and the public shamings on social media, they're not even a flaw of the system. From the perspective of the platform owners, they're actually the business model, which is crazy, right? And so then they have this thing called like persuasive design, which is an umbrella term of psychological techniques borrowed directly from the designers of casino slot machines for the express purpose of encouraging compulsive behavior. So one example is like, you when you pull down on your phone, you know how it's like at the bottom, like it'll show you one screen at a time, and then like it'll then refresh, and then you'll see the next screen. That's actually an example of what they do with the slot machines. It's called variable reward. So you can't predict whether or not refreshing the screen will bring you new posts to read. So the uncertainty makes you keep trying and trying and trying, like a slot machine, right? So now the attention economy is designed to prioritize what's most compelling, what's going to scare you, horrify you, rather than what's true. So it systematically distorts the picture in our head of what we carry around, and it influences our sense of what matters, what our threats are, who our political enemies are, et cetera, et cetera. So now, having said that, going back to what's happening in the US, first of all, it's a description of why it's all fucked up, and not just in the US, but everywhere else in the world. But also, do we even really have a good picture of what's going on in the US? I'm sure if we went home, like when I was hanging out with my parents, it was fine. Like, US was a great place. I loved it. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, how much of this is fucking with our heads right now.
Well, I think the answer to that is no. I think the answer to your question is, do we even have a good picture of what's happening in the U.S.? It has to be no, because we don't even have a good picture of what's happening here where we are, let alone in another country, right? So it has to be no. I mean, what you just said, all of it, I absolutely agree with. And you know this, like you're preaching to the choir here. We've had this discussion, many times, but like, I like how that book breaks it down, and how you've thought about it. And it's, in a way, it's even worse than that, because like we like to put the responsibility, and rightly so, on a lot of the big tech, right? Big tech, the algorithm, we've talked about this before, it's hacking our brains. But on top of that, in addition to that, we're also hacking each other's brains. Because how many group chats are you a part of, or how many friends they have that forward and share videos with you, that share headlines, that share links, right? And that's not the algorithm anymore. That's us as human beings, as peers, sharing things with one another, right?
Yeah.
So like you're in a group chat, for example, with a bunch of people, and all day long, all the members of that group chat are just sharing links, sharing videos that are outrageous things and that outrage you, rightfully.
Yeah.
And so no longer, like, I mean, big tech and the algorithm is hacking us. But then to make matters worse, we're hacking each other in addition to that hacking, So it's become this whole web, this perverse web of just like diverting our attention and grabbing our attention. And I've never thought about it the way you just said it, and the way the book puts it is that we really are paying with our lives, and our lives are really the sum total of what we pay attention to. So if we're constantly, if the majority of the things that we pay attention to are negative, then what does that say about the quality of our life, right? And when you put
Absolutely.
it that way, it absolutely makes sense. And it absolutely is the sickness with a lot of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And that's not to
Yeah.
say that there aren't horrible things happening throughout the world. There are.
Well,
And a lot of these things are
like,
true. But the way we
yeah.
go about absorbing this information definitely, I think, makes it worse, and it makes our quality of life needlessly worse than it has to be.
So yeah, number one is Oliver Berkman, 4,000 Weeks. So none of these are my own original thoughts. They're from Oliver Berkman, and even him, like, it's not his original thoughts, because like all of our thoughts come from somewhere. Like we're just reinterpreting and retelling stories that have been told over and over and over and over. He's just told in an extremely compelling way a story that we've talked with amongst each other, and we're trying to grasp so that we can change our behaviors. And we're really just pawns too. Like we're like the social media companies in the pursuit of profits and capitalism, they've kind of brainwashed themselves that that profits are more important than anything else, right? They've created, like, it's almost like they've infected themselves. Then they've created the system which infects us, and we're just pawns. So we start us sharing these things virally is part of the actual strategy. It's part of it. And so, like, I we have the accountability. I wouldn't blame us. And then Tristan Harris, right? We talked about. So he's quoted in this book, and so it's now interesting to kind of see the work Tristan Harris is doing, and it makes it so much more compelling to me now. And I want to go back to really look at things systemically, because you have to solve this at a systemic level and a systems level. You can't really starve it at the individual level, because we've already been infected. Like, you actually have to go back and like fight the virus and build the vaccine, because the people themselves are not strong enough to resist that. And to that point, Tristan Harris says, every time you open a social media app, there are literally thousands of people on the other side of the screen paid to keep you there. So it's unrealistic to expect us, you and me, to resist this assault on our time by willpower alone. And it's got to involve bigger things like politicians, et cetera, et cetera. So it is really fascinating. And what he says is like, we're like, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. Remember, we were talking about that in the previous show, Social Dilemma show, and I think that was a quote from the movie. He says that's not even totally accurate. It's like, we're not even the product. We're like the fuel. And these companies just burn us, like our time and our attention, and they just literally burn us, and then it burns it. It's gone, right? So I still, not to like humble brag, but I really just like, I don't like that stuff, that negativity on I just don't surf it. Like, I really don't. And I think like today, I try to make some of my social encounters like this. Like I find the three of us talking about these issues, I think it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes we'll fight and this and that, but I don't think that, like, I think it's a positive thing that we're doing with our lives. Like earlier, I did a online Zoom workout thingy, like, just so I could be with other people. And I think you can make these intentional decisions. You actually have to go back into your calendar and look at your time and be really honest with yourself and say, in a 168-hour week, how many hours am I sleeping? How many hours am I with my family? How many hours am I working out? How many hours am I talking to my friends? And you've got to just like give yourself a report card grade. And you first assess yourself. Are you at A, B, C, D, F? And then you've got to make those changes, like from a planning perspective. Like, before you even look at your phone, you've got to make those high level decisions. And I think lockdown has helped people some, and also not helped people some, obviously, because like for some people there's nothing to do and they can't leave their apartment, so it's like even worse because they're only in front of their screen.
I mean, Howie, you know this because I had an offline conversation with Howie about this. And for me, I think the lockdown has helped me in a way. And it's interesting, and it's funny that you bring up this conversation now, because throughout this lockdown, I had bouts of what I would consider depressive stages. And I never really felt that way pre-lockdown. And I was trying to kind of self-analyze why this was happening. And I found the reason. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that it was my phone. It was my phone. Like you say, in lockdown, because we can't go out, activities, all that kind of out the window. So we are kind of hostage to our phones. It's sitting right there, and it's our portal to the entire world and all the entertainment we could have at our fingertips, right? So it's really hard not to get absorbed in it. And because we've had conversations about this, I'm a little more self-aware. So I could, if I tried to put some intention into it, I could kind of spot what's happening in the moment. The content that was being shown to me, and in addition, the content that's being shared in, let's say, WeChat through friends, was becoming more and more negative, that I was getting depressed by it all. And the moment I put in a lot of willpower to disengage myself from the phone, from WeChat in general, even, I noticeably and immediately became happier. I would open up all the windows in my apartment, let the sunlight come in. Obviously, for long stretches of time, the weather was really nice. And then you'd hear the birds chirping, and no traffic noise. And immediately I would feel in a much better mood. And I don't know how, or even if we should convince and preach to other people about this, but I haven't felt more strongly about something for a very long time than this. That I really feel like however many positives that social media brings, I'm almost convinced now on a large scale, it brings more negatives. And I feel that it's a plague on us in our modern society. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not smart enough to come up with the answer, but I know from an individual standpoint, try to disengage from it. Try to spend significantly less time on it. Because when you think about a lot of the things that people are outraged about, whether it's locally here in China or abroad, you think if you really question and dig into, okay, well, what is your outrage coming from? They'll be like, well, I saw this video. See, let me forward it to you. How much do you know about what's happening? Well, I've heard because this is saying that and that is saying this. And when you keep pressing on where their stance and their outrage is really coming from, and I'm not saying they're wrong, and I'm not saying these things aren't really happening either, but if you press forward on why they're outraged, it's all because of information they're being fed. Whether it's true information or maybe not so true information or information that's taken out of context. It can be a mixture of all those things. And you realize, like, well, why? Like, why are you turning your life into that when you can turn that off right now, look out your window, and things are fine for you? So why are you turning your life, especially if you're not really doing anything about it more than just being outraged about it?
But like what you said was like, I mean, it's gospel, right? Like I very much appreciate like your openness to sharing, like you were going through some of these tough times. There's probably a number of people around Shanghai, if you were to listen to this, that could relate to what Justin just said. Like I have friends that have kind of been in that cave and that echo chamber of just negativity, and just negativity is never going to win. Like I just like think about it. Like nothing great has ever been the result of something predominantly negative. There's got to be positivity in it. There can be negativity, but it can't be all negative. And so that should be a sign when you see something that's all negative, then that should be a sign to get the fuck out of there. That's like going into a crime-ridden neighborhood and you see drug dealers everywhere. Like you should be like, I'm getting the fuck out of here because ain't nothing's going to be good. Like if you see drug dealers everywhere with guns, you think they're going to invite you over for a party and give you a massage and invite you to dinner? Like
That's
cook
true.
like
And it's
spaghetti
like
bolognese.
our willingness to stay in that echo chamber is like us
Yeah,
willing to stay in that neighborhood,
yeah,
knowing that something bad is eventually going to happen to us and complaining about it at the same time. It's like, no, you have the power to change this for you.
yeah. And like, and here's the I wanted to add this point. I just kind of thought of this analogy as you were talking. So how do we know that our view of the world is maybe distorted? How do we know that it isn't really that bad and negative and all that stuff, right? Because we did talk about how, okay, the algorithms are designed to really amplify those things that horrify and scare you. But here's why I think that we don't have an accurate picture. Because if you were to go on Instagram, well, I mean, if you're like a guy like us, right? And I'll be honest, but if you open up my Instagram, somehow I'm served with lots of beautiful women into my Instagram. Like,
I
something
wonder
happened.
why.
I don't know.
Somehow
I might have added a
Instagram's just
couple of them
forcing
at
those
some point.
pictures on you
Yeah, yeah. And I might have
against your
added them
will.
a couple.
Against your will,
Yeah,
you're seeing those
yeah.
pictures.
Against my will. It's 1,000 other people, like Oliver Berkman's saying, like, like kind of like conspiring against me. But like, if I were to then say, hey, the world at large is just filled, like the people in the world is represented by like the people that I see in Instagram, we would know that would be false. The wider world does not look like my Instagram, guaranteed 100%. And so I think that's probably a fairly, a crude but effective metaphor to say that the wider world is not like a bigger, larger scale version of like what we see in WeChat, right? You can't just take that one comment like a map. Oh, this is a 1 to 1,000 scale, and then you scale it up, and that's the world. And I think like those two kind of metaphors together, I think show us that that's not how things are. One other thing I want to share from Oliver Berkman, right? And this is sort of like the what's conspiring against this piece is that we also know that unscrupulous politicians, he says, can overwhelm their opposition, not to mention the fact checking capabilities of journalists, simply by flooding a nation's attentional bandwidth with outrage after outrage after outrage, so that each new scandal overwrites the last one in public awareness. And anyone who responds or retweets, even if their intention isn't to condemn the hate mongering, finds themselves rewarding it with attention and thereby helping it to spread. So there's like all these agents that have their own personal motives of doing this stuff. And these large social networks have basically enabled the exchange and the viral spread of negativity, because in those larger networks, negativity spreads faster. The R naught of negativity is like COVID, is like Omicron. And
Well,
positivity, it doesn't really spread,
it's been weaponized. It's been weaponized.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
So yeah, this is the world we live in. So like, I have some hacks. Like, I mean, like you said, you shared what you do, but Howie, I'm kind of curious. Have you gone through anything similar, and like what's the antidote for you?
Continuing what Justin mentioned about, we had that offline conversation about what Justin went through, and I kind of piggybacked on that with what I went through, which is something similar, of spiraling down this abyss of negativity based off of the content that I was ingesting, which immediately affected my, state of mind. So I totally understand how that happens, and what you guys were both speaking about, it totally makes sense. Which brings me back to the one line that we all know, maybe not buy into, but maybe we do buy into, which is ignorance is bliss, right? And so, which goes down to, okay, well, if you ignore social media, if you ignore any type of information, ingesting of any information, maybe you're better off, right? Ignorance is bliss. But then I struggle with the idea that, yeah, maybe personally in a selfish way, you could become a better person. But then the whole idea on the flip side, the positivity of a platform such as social media is giving a voice to the voiceless, is bringing awareness to the real atrocities and negativities that happen in this world. So my struggle is that, do you ignore, or like, oh, hold on, let me rephrase this. I want to go back to what Justin said, which I think is really important to clarify. Justin said is, okay, you can ignore all this stuff, or you can listen to it, but what are you going to do about it, right? Are you somebody that's going to act upon, let's say you read about this negativity or atrocity that happened in the world. Let's say the Texas shooting. Oh my God, all of these kids that, 20 plus 21 deaths that happened, 18 kids, 19 kids. Um, oh my God, it's horrible, and it really affects your mood. If I just ignored it and I didn't, like, have access to that kind of information, would I be better off? Yeah, probably, in a selfish way. But you're also unaware of these atrocities that happen. You know what I'm saying? So what do you do about that information? Are you one to just sit in your bubble and be like, oh God, oh, that's horrible. This world is so fucked up, which also, trickles down to my world is fucked up, which means that, oh, this is horrible. I'm just negative. Or are you going to be able to be an advocate of gun prevention, gun legislation, or whatever? So it's really about, like, how do you handle all that stuff? So if you're a person that doesn't really do anything, you're just kind of in your own bubble and just kind of living your own life, which is totally fine. Then yeah, I think the ignorance is bliss totally works. But if you're somebody that actually, wants to make a difference in the world, who really wants to put in that effort, which is not the majority of the world, right? It's a very small percentage of people that actually have that kind of, fever inside of them. That kind of dictates how you really should ingest social media, I think. I don't think it's just like an umbrella of just negativity.
Yeah, I mean, you have a point. You have a good point. Um, yeah, I mean, the whole kind of metaphor of like ignorance is bliss, right? And we were talking about that before. And historically, I've always stood on the side that no, I want to know. I want to know. Like we've talked about like examples like the Matrix, like before. Like, would you want to be unplugged, or would you be in the Matrix, or whatever it is? And it's like, no, I kind of want to know. But my tune and my opinion on that has changed lately. Where I think maybe there is a thing to ignorance is bliss. And ignorance is not even is a loaded word, right? Because I think the word ignorance implies that you're shutting yourself off from valid information, which which it does mean. But I don't think that's really what's happening, right? And so an example would be like ignorance is bliss, and you can draw an analogy or a parallel to that being like um being hydrated is healthy to you. Like, don't drink the water. And obviously that doesn't make any sense. But if I gave you more information and the reality was that that water is poisoned, do you still want to drink it? And I think that's the complexity of the conversation now. It's not so black and white about ignorance is bliss or not, and you're just shutting yourself off from good information. Because the information itself has been, in my humble opinion, has been so badly tainted that I think it's a legitimate question of whether you should ingest that information or not anymore. Just like if your water supply was tainted. It's a legitimate and you're thirsty and you're getting dehydrated. Well, it's a legitimate question of whether ingesting that water is ultimately better for you or not. And I think that's where we find ourselves today. You know, and I'll end my part on this is I want to be intentional about living a firsthand life.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
I just thought of this, but I'm sure it's not my idea. I'm sure there's been several books and speakers who already talk about this. I'm sure. I don't know. Um, but it's leading a firsthand life, and I feel like our lives, again, I misspoke. I shouldn't say our lives. I shouldn't assume for anybody else. I feel my life has been hijacked where I was getting to a point where I wasn't living my own life firsthand anymore. I was living it through a secondhand, third-hand accounts. And when you think about that, that's just a crazy way to live your own life. You're not even living life through your own damn eyes anymore. Your own damn eyes, ears, nose, taste, whatever.
Damn eyes.
Damn eyes. And I want to be more intentional about living a firsthand life and living a life through my own eyes and experiences. And you got your opinions about the world through your own experiences traveling through it. While I know that that's not very realistic and practical for us, but I think that is kind of a level of existence that I want to strive towards. To have a worldview curated by my own actual experiences. And that would put more onus on myself to make sure that I expand my experiences. I don't know. That sounds like a really healthy way to go about your life. Especially everywhere you go, you make it a point to be good and kind and respectful to other people and other cultures and spread it around. I mean, that is an ideal.
It's totally doable. Like what you said was, I love it. It's totally doable, right? Like it's like we don't want to live some secondhand, third-hand life. Like I don't want to live in the metaverse. Like I don't want to. I want to live. I want to make use of my time on this planet to do stuff. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and it forces you to like go out there and experience things. And we know from I think the things that we've studied is that like humankind is generally good. Like we've made a lot of progress to get to the point. Like look at all the cultures, all the food. Like look at all the positive things. I was talking to a friend the other day, and my friend was kind of down in the dumps. Like his neighborhood's a little bit more strict, and he hasn't been able to go out. And like I just like this is a really like awesome, positive person, but I could just feel like he was kind of down in the dumps. And I'm just like, man, you got to snap out of it. It's like this world is so extraordinary. Like, earlier in the conversation, I was just like, humans are so extraordinary. I was like, it's so extraordinary. And basically, you're in your cave, right? So it's like, imagine the whole world. And it's this beautiful place. I mean, like we've traveled around the world. It's gorgeous. There's sun all everywhere, right? That shines on every part of the world.
Is there?
And imagine there's these caves that we've built, these like social media caves, and half the people in the world are just literally in a fucking cave. If they were just walk 5 steps out the cave, they would see like sunlight, clouds, sun, nature, whatever. And it's like we're just fucking in our caves, right? I was like yelling at them, like we're in a motherfucking caves every single day. And it's like, but the world is right outside, like you're saying. Just step the fuck outside, because once you're in the cave, over time, you forget that you're even in the damn cave. That's the scary part.
Yeah.
And so that cave becomes your damn world. I've been there. I mean, like I was like that a couple of months ago. I was in a dark ass cave. And I was just like, it was terrible. And then like you step outside, you got to take that first step, right? Just walk 5 feet and see what's out there, and it's so extraordinary. And then then what can you do with your life is that you go out there and you have it, like you said, put the onus on yourself to expand your experience. And the thing is, like, you're going to get a much more complete picture of that than the media, because even if all your experiences are anecdotal, like that's not worse than the media cherry picking. Like the social media algorithms are way worse at choosing a representative picture than you would be, because they're only going to choose the fucking horror moments. At least when you go out there, it's like random. You go to a village, and if you're nice to people and you activate the positive side, like, and we've done that, right? We've gone to villages around different places and cities, and we've been nice to people at the coffee shops and the subway, and all we got was kindness back, generally speaking. And the world is just generally kind, and you just like if you see something that's negative, then you kind of just steer past that. but I think we just forget. And then now they've built all these caves like the Matrix, right? That's the algorithm, and it's all tapping in. There's other parts, right? Like, your need to compare yourself to others. Like this grabbing your attention thing is like one facet of how we are biologically. There are other facets that they're also tapping into simultaneously, and so maybe predominantly the horror movies are very destructive because it creates conflict and anger and outrage and fighting. But there are other ones that are just completely sap you of all your productivity because then you do nothing. And that's where you see a lot of people, like in China, right? For instance, there are probably people you don't see as much of the outrage, but the negative impact of social media on people is probably also very vast because people are just wasting their time on like Xiaohongshu and all this stuff, and it's the same shit, right? It's the same. I mean, everyone around me, like Anne, all she does is just like look at her phone all day. Like,
100%, it's just as bad here, if not maybe even worse. Yeah, I mean, but that's a whole nother debate, right? That we can get into some other time, I guess. Is where you stand on this whole kind of government policy and approach to kind of enforcing like rules around children and their social media and gaming interaction here in China, right? Yeah, I don't know, but going to what you were just saying, this reminds me of a YouTube video I watched a long time ago, and it was a YouTube video about how to create the best thumbnails for your video, right? Right? And it's very interesting because this goes into, because we talk about the algorithm and the tech companies so much and our own personal behavior. A lot of it is also about the content creators themselves, right? Because they have to game the system to get the most views and clicks. They have to game the system to work so the algorithm works for them instead of against them. And so what happens is creating like the best thumbnail and title for your video is pressing on human on like people's kind of worries and people's insecurities. And that's how you get them to click on the video the best. If you just say something super positive, that is through data not going to get a bunch of clicks. But when you pose a question, for example, like what Howie mentioned, are you too old to learn programming now? Or is 40 years old, is being 40 too old to learn programming? Whatever it is. Well, that's
is life over at 40? Or like, like it's just tapping into your fears.
They play, and they not only play, but they prey on your personal insecurities.
Yeah.
Wait, so what's the headline for our episode now? What's the headline? What's the headline for this episode right now?
Are you too dumb to listen to this episode? Like,
are you an idiot that just listens to social media?
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, if we named it that, we'd get like triple.
Oh, it'd be our most listened to episode of all time, for sure.
Yeah,
because people be like, "I'm not an idiot."
Yeah.
Like, so I think like just if it works for people, or if they can, if they're willing to try it, is just like go through just do a kind of a self inventory. Look at your calendar, and there's features on your phone now, and some phones where you can see your screen time, and just kind of like be honest with yourself, or have call your friend up and have them look at how you spend your time. First thing is just like ask yourself how you spend your time. For me, it's just being more intentional with my time. It's not like, it's like to your point, Justin, not like saving. It's like I have the time. It's more about me actually using the time in a more productive way. I don't have things that are keeping me. Again, that's a symptom. All these, like the guy, like Oliver Brickman says, the social media is just that's the time filler thing. It's not really the root cause.
It all goes back to one thing for me. For me, it's just the idea of living a firsthand life, I think it's become so crystal clear to me through this lockdown, the importance of doing that.
That's the title, by the way, of this show.
Yeah, you think?
Meanwhile,
I
Justin
like
is sharing all these posts of his life, trying to affect other people to live through your life.
Yeah. No. I'm living a first-hand life. I'm just forcing my life onto others so that they live through my life. That's funny.
All right.
All right, guys. That's it for today. Hopefully we can stop doing these Zoom pods soon, and we can.
I can't wait.
Get back in our studio and do it right. Do it right.
I can't wait to get face to face again, man. I can't wait.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. Who knows? But we will see. For now, be good. Be well. I'm Justin.
I'm Howie.
And I'm living the first, like 1.5 hand life.
All right. Peace.